We all have stories about money. Some are funny, some are embarrassing, others make us cringe, while others leave us empowered. Far too often, these stories are left unshared. Money is such a taboo topic, but quiet as it's kept, our experiences with money are more common than we think. When we share stories, we feel less alone in our experiences, and we discover new strategies for navigating life with money. I'm your host, Melissa Mazard. You're listening to Memories of Money, where our guests reveal their financial secrets and where you will learn practical lessons and principles for a life of financial health and prosperity. Today's guest shares her journey from living in poverty as a child to achieving early retirement before the age of 50. Let's get into it. Enjoy the episode.
My earliest memory of money was when I was a kid, like 8 or 9 years old, and I lived out in the country in rural South Carolina. And we had this big blackberry patch in our backyard. And I remember whenever the season came for blackberries, we would put on our long sleeves, because you have the thorns, and we would pick blackberries. We would get like the quart jars and we would fill up the jars with blackberries and go sell them to the neighbors. And I think I remember we sold them like $1 or $1.50 a quart, but they got a nice quart of blackberries and we got paid for it. I just remember a lot of work that we did, and not to mention, getting stuck with the thorns and then going to our neighbor's house and hoping that someone would have pity on us and want some blackberries. And that was probably the first experience that I had where I was able to exchange my time and a product for money. I did feel good that I was doing something that made money because I was raised by a single dad with 6 kids. So that was a little part of me that said, oh, I can try to do this on my own, or I could actually earn some money myself. That memory just kind of stuck with me, just that's how it works. You produce something, whether it's from your time, your energy, whatever product it is, somebody else wants it and they'll pay you for it. Some of the things that I learned from my dad that actually helped me on my financial journey was things like he didn't really like having debt. And back then they would call it paying on time, where you would pay a little bit at a time. I remember seeing him go to work every day. I never remember him missing a day because he was sick. I didn't even know what a sick day was until I was in my 20s and I got around other people at work. He always had a second job. I knew he got paid on Thursdays. And that meant that Wednesday night, the refrigerator was empty because the next day was grocery day. So those were the things that I learned from my dad. We take in so much when we're young that actually sticks with us, because my dad, he passed away when I was 18, about 3 months before I graduated from high school. So everything that I learned from him about money and otherwise, it came before I was 18, but so many of the things that I learned from him stuck with me throughout my life, even though after 18, he was gone. I guess one of the biggest decisions that I made was to go to college. And my dad, he never got to see me graduate from high school. He never got to see me go to college, but he always wanted better for me and my siblings than he had. He only had a 6th grade education, but he knew how important that was. So he instilled that in us. So I think he would have been really proud that I did go to college. My first real job at a college was working for Walmart headquarters in Bentonville, Arkansas. Now, that was a big move because I grew up in South Carolina. I had no idea how I was going to pay for the cost of a move or get an apartment or whatever. I had no plan. I was right out of college, so the student loans were due. It wasn't crazy, but I was worried about that. Working for Walmart, they basically would pay for a yellow Ryder truck and a hitch to put your car on the back. And I ended up having to make that drive myself. I didn't have family that could actually go with me. Now, my brother, he actually helped me hook my car up. He guided me as I backed up out of the driveway to make this scary, lonely trip to start my first job. And I just remember it was raining that day. And I remember it was raining because I was literally starting to cry as I left, thinking, I cannot do this. I didn't even have a plan. So it took me 2 days to make the drive, but I'm in this big Ryder truck alone. It was 14 hours. I split it up into 2 days. And by the time I got to Arkansas, I didn't have an apartment lined up, didn't know that I needed a security deposit or like you had to put money down to get your utilities turned on, all of those things. I had no idea. I was just on a wing and a prayer. My dad, he would probably say, you need to have a plan. You need to figure this out. And I just figured it out once I got to Bentonville, Arkansas, where I knew no one. I was in a brand new place, no family, no friends. All I had was a job. And I just had to figure it out from there. But that was a rough start. It was a really rough start. So many new things. But I guess the one good thing was that I had a job. I really didn't do much saving. I just remember I had a coworker to say, you work for Walmart. Walmart is a publicly traded company, and they offered a 15% discount when you buy Walmart stock as an employee. Everybody told me, yeah, you can't beat that deal. You should do that. So I don't recall that they had a 401k or anything, but I did set it up through payroll deduction where I brought Walmart stock at a 15% discount. Besides that, I probably had an emergency fund. I didn't really call it emergency fund, but I knew I had to save something in case things went wrong. And in my mind, it was because I didn't have family or anyone else that could bail me out. It was all on me. Like if I needed a new tire, if something happened with my car, I had to be able to pay for that myself. And so the emergency fund was really, really important to me. While I was in Arkansas, I did get married. And shortly after my husband got out of the military, we moved for a job that he got in Ohio. So we moved from Arkansas to Ohio. And as soon as I got to Ohio, I was pregnant. So I had my daughter, and we were the big happy family for a long time. And after about 12 years, we ended up getting a divorce. But during all this time, I'm feeling pretty safe, pretty secure. We both work, got my daughter, live in the big, happy family. Everything was rosy. And when we got divorced, I had to rethink everything because what I thought was a shared journey was now just me. And I thought a lot about how do I make sure I'm going to be okay, my daughter's going to be okay. And growing up in poverty, it's a mindset too. And I just was running so hard away from being in poverty. And I just never wanted to revisit that. I never wanted my daughter to know poverty the way that I did growing up. That was the first thing that popped in my head. If anyone has ever gone through divorce or knows someone that's going through divorce, it is devastating financially, emotionally. You rethink your entire life. It changes the whole trajectory of your life. That was a huge deal. And it took about 2 years to kind of get over it. And you're never truly over it, but I guess get to the point where I could actually start doing something different and addressing my fears. So I had to ask myself that really hard question, like, what now? What do I like to do? And finally, when I spent some time thinking about that question, I was always curious about the stock market. Even though a divorce is devastating and everything, that was a very pivotal moment in my life. And it did change the trajectory of things for me. And probably the most tangible thing that really got me was when you get a divorce, basically the judge or the process, they put all the retirement money, all the assets in one pot, and they split it down the middle. I remember looking at our 401k statements. We made similar income, similar salaries, got a similar match. I had $20,000 in my 401k, and I'm in my mid 30s at this point. And my husband, he had $120,000. So he had $100,000 more than I did in his account. As time went on, I figured out a few of the things that made a difference. But the biggest thing was that the gap kept growing and compounding. So he was investing in more aggressive things. He actually worked for a very large bank. And this was 2003, 2004, maybe 2005, when banks were doing really well. Well, that was one of the things he was invested in. And then as his salary got inched up more than mine, then of course his 6% that he was putting in was more than my 6% because he was making more. So all these little nuances over 10 years adds up. And it did. So it wasn't one big thing that made the difference. It was all these little things that just compounded over time. I fell squarely in that stereotype of women not paying attention to their finances. And I remember I read a Bank of America study that they did some research. It was in the workplace where they were showing that there was such a huge disparity in 401k balances between women and men. And I fell right in the middle. Actually, mine was a bit worse, having that $100,000 difference. So that was just interesting to me. I'm like, wow, I had no idea like that type of research existed, but I'm like, okay, I guess this confirms that this happens more than I thought. And I kind of just was in sort of that same category as many women are. But I'm glad I did wake up and I started making a change just a little bit at first, but it starts to add up. And when you're really curious, as soon as you find the answer to one thing, you want to know more and more and more. And that's what happened. I entered into personal finance probably from an angle that most people don't. You start thinking about investing after you do the basics, your budget, you get rid of your debt. But I was so interested in stocks. So I was talking to a friend at work one day, I remember. She lived in Boston and I was in Ohio. We're on the phone talking one day. She invested in stocks. So of course I was picking her brain and she told me about this nonprofit organization called Better Investing. She was like, yeah, they support investing clubs and there's probably one in your area. Just Google it. There was one in the area that I lived in, and it was called a model club. A model club is just basically where the meetings are open to the public. They operate in the ideal way that an investment club should operate, and they represented the organization. They invested real money, but the nonprofit part of it supported those investment clubs. So I went to a few meetings. And I was always so interested. I thought these people were so smart and they're talking about things that I thought was fun. They were talking about great companies and leadership. It was all about long-term investing. So no day trading or options or anything like that, just having great companies, being an owner. I love the idea of owning part of the company, voting your proxy and things like that. I just nerded out on it. I went to probably 4 or 5 meetings. They met once a month. I chatted with a lot of the members over time. We went to lunch and stuff. And I said, yeah, I'd be interested in joining the club. In order to be a member of the club, you had to present a stock. And they gave me a mentor and everything. It enlightened me a lot. And everyone in the club was smarter than me. But I got my curiosity satisfied. So then I started going back and saying, okay, I'm no longer afraid of the stock market. I'm learning all this stuff about finances. Why am I not maxing out my 401k and maxing out my Roth and maxing out my health savings account? So I ended up having to backtrack because I started sort of at a level that, or from a position that most people don't start. So I backtrack with, okay, let me do these other things to make sure I'm taking advantage of that as well. As far as the other general personal finance, that just naturally came up. This community of people, they remind me a lot of like the FIRE community. FIRE stands for Financial Independence, Retire Early, because as you're talking to people, it's not just about investing in a stock or investing in the stock market. It's about everything else that surrounds that. Like, how do you create enough money to be able to invest? The main thing the club did for me was that I wasn't afraid to invest anymore. I wasn't afraid of the stock market. I learned that you cannot save yourself to wealth. You have to invest. You can't have your money sitting in a checking account that'll get eaten up by inflation. So you have to find a way to get it to grow at a faster pace. When I got to the point where I was investing, I knew how to invest. I wasn't afraid of it anymore. That helped my nest egg grow a little faster, because once I got divorced, I started really like amping up that investing. And I'm no genius or anything, but I started a lot of that heavy investing, maxing out everything in 2008, which turned out to be a really good time. Real estate market was crashing, the stock market was crashing and all of that, but I was still investing. Like it didn't scare me like I know it did a lot of people. A lot of people took their money out of their 401k, they stopped investing. But with the investment club, we talked a lot about how this was actually a really good time to be investing. It worked out really well. Again, a lot of things are just luck and timing, but the timing was good. It was 2008. And that's when I started doing a lot of my heavy lifting. And that ended up making a huge difference. I would listen to podcasts. That's my preferred way of learning. There was only a handful of personal finance podcasts. You had Clark Howard, Dave Ramsey, Susie Orman, a few of those. And then in right around 2015, 2016, there started to be so many more. And they started talking about, there was like all these niches, like people talking about debt, people talking about real estate, then people talking about financial independence, then people talking about retiring early. And that's what got me. I was into financial literacy. That was a big deal for me. I even wrote a book just to my daughter called Money Letters to My Daughter. And after I did that, financial literacy was it. I wanted to teach younger people about it. I'd never thought that that was possible while I was still working a full-time job, but I was hustling hard. I was doing financial literacy workshops, education, speaking, while I was still working full time. And that was getting tiring. So as I'm hearing these people talk about financial independence and retiring early, that was very attractive to me. I'm like, maybe that's the way that I can cut out of corporate America and actually focus on financial literacy and education, because that's what I really love doing. I started with my numbers. I did my first net worth statement. I figured out my FIRE number, which was 25 times my expenses. And I kept giving myself every excuse in the world of why I couldn't cut out from corporate America. I would say things like, what about health insurance? Well, I'll find out a way to take care of that. What about getting money out of my retirement accounts early? Found a way to take care of that. And once my daughter graduated from high school, I didn't even have that as an excuse. As I'm working on my numbers, I made some projections, had my nerdy spreadsheet, and I finally got to the point where I was able to retire. I was 47. But then I still wasn't quite ready. I had that one more year syndrome. And so I hung around for another 2 years. And instead of the 25 times my expenses, I got to about 30 times my expenses because I felt like I needed the extra cushion. So I officially retired from my corporate job in December 2019. And that was a huge shift for me. Mind shift, my life, my career, all of that. And ever since then, I've been talking about financial independence, setting yourself up to retire early if you want to. If you love your job, consider yourself very, very lucky because most people don't. The financial independence retire early community, the movement, the people made a huge difference and got me to a place where I never even imagined I would ever be, from the little girl that was picking blackberries in the backyard and getting stuck. The financial independence piece just really spoke to me. It got me to where I wanted to be a lot sooner and just put me in a position where I can touch so many more people. If I was still working the corporate grind, there's just no way I would have had the impact that I'm having now. I'm thankful that most of the mistakes that I made them when I was young and didn't have much money. Things like in 1999, the dot-com bubble. I remember me and my husband, we started just investing any stock or a company that had .com at the end of their name. A stock that I brought, it was called salon.com. I barely knew what they did. And I think I brought like $1,000 worth. I don't even remember how many shares it was. And it went down and went down and went down. So 1999, 2000, all these tech stocks, they're going down. A few survived, not many. That $1,000, I think, ended up going down to about $80 before I decided to sell it. And I just gave up on it. So I'm like, well, I guess I can sell it and we can go have dinner or something. But that was a big mistake. And $1,000 at the time, that was a lot of money. But I'm really glad that I learned that lesson sooner because it definitely could have been a lot worse if I had a lot more money. Another thing that I remember that sort of shifted the way that I did things going forward was when I was in college. I mean, I was a poor college kid. I don't even know how I was able to afford payments for a new car, which was a horrible decision. It's like, if I'm already struggling and I'm in college, why on earth am I buying a car? I don't know. It made no sense. I remember the car payments was $326 a month. And it was only a few months before I realized, oh my God, I can't make this payment. So I think I might have squeezed out maybe a few more months. I had the car for maybe 6 months, maybe even a year. And so I'm like, I cannot make this payment anymore. I need to see if I can refinance it or something. So I go to the bank, I meet with the person, and I was asking to have the car refinanced because I couldn't afford the payment. So she pulls up something on her computer and she says, we can't refinance this because you owe more on the car than it's worth. I felt so horrible because I'm like, what am I going to do? And I remember I just left, went into my $326 a month car payment and just cried because I had no idea was what I was going to do. And I don't even know how I got myself into that. It was ridiculous. So that was the first and only new car I ever bought because they can get upside down almost immediately. And I just found smarter ways to do it. I'd rather buy a car that's maybe 3 or 4 years old where somebody else is taking the depreciation, get one with reasonable payments, or just pay cash for it. I actually got to that point. I've saved a lot of money from then to now by just buying my cars smarter. That lesson, it felt so bad that I knew I never wanted to feel like that again. So I made a lot of stupid mistakes like that. And these days, I almost don't even call them mistakes anymore. They're just lessons that hopefully I learned something from them and I wised up. I get the question often where people are like, okay, I'm ready to do something about my finances. I want to build wealth. I want to get out of debt or whatever. And they're like, where should I start? And my answer always is start by organizing your finances so you figure out where you're at. Debt might be it for some people. For other people, it might be saving. For other people, it might be increasing your income. A win would be to know how much you have in your 401k. Looking at how much are you actually taking home after taxes, after your health insurance. So just assessing where you're at currently, because then you will start to see the gaps. If you're making $250,000 a year and you still can't make your bills, it might not be your income. It might be, what are you doing in between? If you're only making $30,000 a year and you're like, why don't I ever have any money? It could be an income problem. And that may be where you need to start. So just like take an inventory, assess where you're at, and start there. And when you do that, simply by figuring that out, that's a win. Give yourself the credit, the rewards that you deserve for finally focusing on your finances. That's a big deal because most people, if you ask them what they make, they don't really know, or they'll give you their gross. If you ask them what they have in their 401k or their retirement, they may not know. So yeah, that's the advice I give everyone is start by organizing your finances and assessing where you are so you can start to see more clearly what are the areas that are going to have the most impact or your areas of opportunity that you need to start fixing first. What I'm doing now is I am working on a book with Wiley called Fire for Dummies. I'm very excited about that. And the main reason is that Wiley is such a big company and they have a lot more reach than I have myself or via my platforms. And I really think the concept of fire and the fire movement, I want that to be accessible and exposed to a lot more people. So I'm excited to get the Wiley audience, the For Dummies audience, to take a look at this fire movement, financial independence, retire early, and just breaking it down, because when you start to pull back the curtain, it's really not new. I go back to when my dad would say, live on less than you earn. That's the big picture concept of fire. You're just speeding it up a little bit. You're optimizing things a little bit more. And with technology, there's a lot more things you can do. So I'm just really excited to get it in the hands of people to kind of look at it and see sort of like a step-by-step guide on how this really works, and for them to sort of step in their own shoes, use their own measuring stick. That's a big thing that I like to talk about as well. When I first got interested in the fire movement, there was sort of an avatar from the early beginnings. It was mainly white, male, high-income engineers, and I was everything but that. And so I had to put on my own lens. I had to use my own measuring stick. to figure these things out. In the book, I just give a lot of credit to making sure that you're giving yourself grace. The psychology of money is a big thing that you have to kind of address before you start with anything. So don't ignore that mental side of finances, because it's a strong pull. It was a strong pull for me, especially growing up in poverty. And I had to get through those things in my own time. But when I did, when it finally clicked, I was ready to go. But until that psychological piece happened, I don't know that anything else would have really worked, or I wouldn't have been able to make the progress that I did. I'm all over social media, Instagram. I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn as well, because I'm a corporate girl. I came from corporate America. So I spend a lot of time on there. Just connect with me on any of my social media platforms, just under my name, Jackie Cummings-Koski. Jackie Cummings-Koski. And I guess one fun thing over the last few years, I adopted a new screen name, and that is Phenomenal Woman, and it is giving homage to Maya Angelou, who's my favorite poet, and her most famous poem is Phenomenal Woman with a PH. The way I spell mine is FI, like financial independence, nominal woman. Thank you so much for having me and giving me a chance to speak in a meaningful way about sort of how I felt on my journey and all those steps. I don't get to talk about that much. It was great to have that talk with you.
Thank you, Jackie, for sharing your story and for reminding us of the power of financial literacy. The path to financial independence starts with education. If you enjoyed this episode, please let us know with a like or review, and stay tuned for the next one.